is the Regular Metal Podcast, episode 78, Marduk, part 2.
To the cross where the weeds of the gospel we breathe. We've been born to prevent the mind of the following Jesus. How you scourge was born as the shepherd of inferior, and you knew what to do. The spiritual weapons of your opponent could hurt your body too. After long mountain, you're jacked to the sky without skill. And now this rock was moving for the kill. Your face, crashing your rage, forsaking your better, setting your praise, breaking your bones, scorning your bone, your power is ceasing without burning ground. Christ, raping, black, you better. Christ, raping, black, you better. The thought is the same and abuses your body, duty next to you when you die. But a warrior of dreams, the beard of your idiot mother must survive. Rushing your face, crushing your rage, forsaking my fear, setting your prey, spilling your blood, killing your God. The reason turning is to bleed like a blood. Christ, raping, black, you better. Christ, raping, black.
In case you're wondering, you just heard some Christ-raping black metal from Marduk. This is part 2
of Marduk's show, and I'm Jason.
I'm Mark, and that was off of the Panzer Division Marduk record,
which we played a song from at the end of part 1. We played, if I do believe, Baptism by Fire, which had great breakdown, which is what really this whole album is. It's like 3.5-minute songs with like a great like tremolo breakdown in the middle, and then like that's it. It's like it's
about a 35-minute record.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's some of the most pummeling black metal that's ever, I think, been put down in a combination of like, here's 8-9 straight songs in a row. No,
it's an impressive album. It's the war part of their trilogy as well.
Yeah, and it's often been compared in some ways as sort of a black metal Rain and Blood type of just total unabashed emotional fury, being thrown down in a very short amount of time. The album also, it's another Tat Green Abyss Studios production, came out in 1999. And that tune in particular, Christ Raping, has even some of the Slayer dive bombs in the middle, very Rain and Blood-esque, if you will. But the album kind of brought a little bit of negative attention on Marduk. I remember when this kind of happened. For the imagery and the fact that they're kind of adopting some of the Nazi imagery and sort of just flirting with the idea of Nazi ideology. It's controversial, you know. Not only that, but I think the sound of it is so far away from what they originally started with on those first few records. It's kind of divided fans in a lot of ways. You know, a lot of people think like this album sounds just so overproduced and just so like industrialized, almost like mechanical, which is I think what the point is.
Probably was.
You know, I mean, the war machine, the blitzkrieg of Nazi Germany is sort of what they're kind of trying to capture here. And you know, it started a movement. Well, it didn't start, but it kind of gets linked in with I read Norse core is what some of the people call it, which is kind of, you know, has Nazi connotations. I've heard from Marduk's end of things that they were sort of trying to promote what they could see as like the ultimate symbol of evil, which is, you know, Nazi Germany and this sort of rolling tanks and this idea of just this ultimate evil that was sort of ruining Eastern Europe in a way. And you know, I'd like to think that that's hopefully where they were at, is they were just sort of using symbolism and not necessarily like, hey, we love Nazis. Nazis are great. You know?
It's just like on their newer records using the Bible as fodder, the violence and brutality of the Bible.
Sure. And we're going to talk about this whole Orthodox black metal kind of thing, you know, coming up here. But I don't know, you know, if Panzer Division is what it is, I think it's a pretty righteous record. You know, it hurts my head after a while listening to it, but it's only 30 minutes long, so
that's the culmination of their you know, their speed era. Really.
And so we had the blood, the war, and next we're going into what, fire or death? No, death. I'm sorry. The Grande Danse Macabre, La Grande Danse Macabre.
La Grande Danse Macabre. If you want to get technical, I can pronounce
Mark's
French
got great Italian, so, or Latin or whatever the hell it is. Go with it. And that's we're going to sort of look at this next era very briefly, if you will, because, you know, where Mark and I really want to get to is the sort of later Marduk years where things kind of tend to get pretty interesting. But the thing about the next two records, which is La Grande Danse Macabre, which ends their trilogy, and then World Funeral, which we chose not to play a song from, you did have one selected. Night
of the Long Knives.
Night of the Long Knives, which again is a Nazi reference to when kind of Hitler assumed power in Germany. The Night of the Long Knives was when he used his sort of private kind of secret police, the SS, to take out what was called then the SA. And his rival, one of his friends kind of coming up through the ranks of the Nazis, was a guy by the name of Ernst Rom. And he was a homosexual. Hitler knew this, and that didn't bode well with Hitler in terms of his ideology of, you know, purity and stuff. You know, so Rome kind of had a lot of power because he controlled the military and the police, I guess. And so Hitler basically had to take out his best friend in order to like secure power, because he was the only rival. And so the Night of the Long Knives is when he unleashes his SS guards, the stormtroopers, essentially, and they wipe out.
How do
the
evil
German
people
military.
get all the cool titles for stuff like, you know, Kristallnacht and, you know, all these horrible things?
Again, another you know, the Jewish destruction, you know, and stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think that's again what Marduk was talking about. This record is, you know, regardless of what you want to think about Marduk, hey, you know, we're just as sort of guilty for reading all these Holocaust books and watching the History Channel and you know, I mean, we're addicted to the, you know, the Hitler Nazi kind of stuff.
Every time you look at the History Channel, there's some new Hitler's wives, Hitler's butthole, who knows?
Hitler's secret drug addiction. You know, and I mean, and he's a fascinating guy. You're right. I mean, you know, we're sort of fascinated by the evil villains in history, and I think
like
Marduk
serial killers. I mean,
sort of said, "Hey, this is the ultimate evil villain. Let's play with it." You know. So, but anyways, we were going to play that, but we had to cut Night of the Long Knives for time. But what's your impression of, I guess, La Grande Danse Macabre and World Funeral and this sort of, I guess, era?
Yeah, World Funeral is just kind of seems like they're trying. They're really trying to do something different, and nothing's happening. La Grande Danse that was the first one I actually picked up probably since Heaven Shall Burn. Probably, yeah, because I didn't. And I got a promo of it, and I was just kind of like, oh, this super speed stuff is not really, you know, for me. I can get into some of it, but I mean, it's a more varied record for sure. They're messing around with their guitar tone. Yeah, it's not quite as Well, it's actually being pumped up higher in the mix, it seems like.
Sure, and the tune we're going to play, Azrael, which you pointed out, what about Marduk?
Another Batman reference?
Nightwing and Azrael and all this, kind of bizarre. This is sort of the end of the Legion era as well. World Funeral will be the last Legion vocal record. You're seeing the end of
Grande Danse,
War,
I believe, is the
leaving.
last one with Anderson on drums, right?
Yes, and now Emil is brought in on World Funeral, and he will play on Plague Angel, and I do believe, will he play on Rom as well?
Yeah, and then we got
a new guy or something. So, but you were mentioning about the playing with sort of guitar tones and stuff on La Grande. The tune Azrael has a kind of a Middle Eastern quality to it, especially near the beginning. It also has a bass solo, which is again predictive of where Marduk's going to go in the future in terms of like allowing the bass to sort of come back into the mix.
Yeah,
they've blazed through and they've almost pummeled you with these last few records, and it's like. You said, they're trying to like experiment and trying to find a new sound, and I don't think Morgan knew where to go. I mean, I think he needed somebody to come in and really challenge his sort of control of the band. Yeah, and that's when he's going to bring in Mortis and
we get Devo back.
Devo
too,
Magnus,
who ends up being have a lot to do with the recording process
and the bass.
And he's been the bass player, but for all intents and purposes, they're like a power trio with a hell of a vocalist.
Yeah.
So I think being able to like diversify, because playing really fast music with just one guitar can kind of get buried.
Yeah.
So the way they've started to construct stuff now with the bass, like it's just like a really good interchange between everybody.
Sure.
It's not just this plodding straight ahead thing. Like, hey, let's slow down and just have some double bass. Not everything has to be a blast all the way through.
Yeah, and
let the songs breathe a little bit.
And you're going to start to hear that in this next set, because after we do go from Azrael, well, we're gonna skip World Funeral, which I do believe was put out 2002, 2003, somewhere in there. I think 2002, because Plague Angel's 2004.
Yeah.
And so we're gonna hear our first of this sort of new era, which is Hangman of Prague and Perish in Flames, and Plague Angel in particular it's just such a pummeling record. I mean, it just beats the living hell out of you. I remember,
but it is more varied, I think, and interesting than the previous.
Oh, for sure, because there's a lot of. The way that they're dirtying up the riffs a little bit.
It sounds really organic. I mean, you're saying it sounded like it was all recorded live to
like
take
an analog.
Yeah,
Steve Albini kind of like approach to black metal or something is kind of where I'm coming from. But the pummeling almost kind of takes on a white noise quality in a soothing sort of way. I mean, there's like I can listen to these last three Marduks and it doesn't kind of give me the headache that, say, Panzer or Nightwing or some of these other records gave me, because the warmth, the analog warmth, I think that sort of rolls off of them in a sense.
Well, yeah, I mean, just the pure variation in tone. Not everything is just pure straight ahead. I mean, that constant throbbing noise.
Yeah, and it's not as like razor sharp. It's got more like a doom quality to it. Like I said, Electric Wizard kind of. Yeah.
And like the vocal patterns that Mortis is starting to do here are so much more different than like what Legion was doing.
It's not the high, just sort of monotonous shriek.
But he's also like playing against melody, and he's just got weird timing choices and stuff too that really kind of like fills up the songs really well.
And you're definitely going to hear a production difference when you get to Hangman of Prague and Perish in Flames here. I mean, if you haven't heard this newer Marduk stuff, like say maybe Nightwing was the last record you listened to, like this is going to kind of freak you out a little bit. I mean,
it's really good production, but it also keeps that black metal kind of lo-fi aesthetic.
Oh, for sure. I think it's more lo-fi than anything they've done. I think the problem that Marduk had, especially with La Grande, was overproduced. It was the Abyss Studios sort of like is famous
squeaky
for
clean guitar tones and stuff.
And sometimes that works. I mean, the early years of Abyss Studios, like 96, 97, I mean, Final Chapter Hypocrisy, Dawn, Slaughter Sun, even in Throne Darkness Triumphant, those were like good records, but then it became formulaic, and I think that studio just became a formula studio.
And I don't think that formula necessarily ever worked for Marduk.
No. Not at all.
I think they're much more. I mean, with doing what they've been doing lately with Devo at the helm, I think that's really kind of been their thing. Like, keep it all within the band.
Yeah, and I think Morgan's goal has always been to make the most blasphemous music he can, and I think he was just very contained and not able to like make anything that really stood out in a sense. He had all these sort of cliche, blasphemous, anti-Christian lyrics all through the 90s and stuff, but there was nothing like bombastic about anything that he was doing that like made him stand out any more than any of the other sort of black metal guys.
And I mean, just look at the song titles on these last couple records too. Like they're actually interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, outside of they're eerie and creepy. Like what is the chorus of Cracking Necks? And,
yeah.
I mean, just all these really bizarre song titles. But, I mean, stuff that actually makes you think of like the Leveling Dust. Well, what the hell's that?
Perish and Hangman of Prague. I mean, great.
I mean, they just sound cool. So instead of like Christraping black metal,
which is like Dimmu Borgir. There was remember that website that you could create a black metal band name.
Oh, jeez.
It was a black metal title generator. I mean, that Marduk was almost playing into those cliches in the early 2000s, late 90s, and here we go with sort of redemption. And so you're going to hear this redemption with Plague Angel, which was put out in 2004. And so we'll hear Hangman of Prague, which is quite a barn burner, kind of the album opener, gets things going in all the right ways. And then they're going to slow things down with the last track we'll play in this set, which is Perish in Flames, kind of a unclean, grinding, just...
back to their Bathoryisms, their triumphant Nordic sounding.
Yeah, but not as clean as even... I mean, it even muddies it up more than the early Bathory sound, which is... Hey, that's to be commended. That's hard to do. So, all right. So enjoy Azrael, Hangman of Prague, and Perish in Flames.
I am the
We just heard Perish in Flames, Hangman of Prague, and Azrael, or the cat from the Smurfs.
Yeah, Gargamel's famous cat.
Little sidekick.
We were talking about this. I was saying, in hindsight, like I really like Rom a lot better than Plague Angel, but you had a kind of important insight if you're kind of listening and
if you're looking at the entire history when I was putting this thing together. I mean, it's the tipping point to where it's like, okay, this is where they finally started kind of heading in this new direction. They're kind of like third chapter or whatever of their career, where I think they're like so hungry to put stuff out, and everything feels like it's super as inspired as their really early stuff. Mm-hmm. So,
and I think it's dangerous or unfair to compare, say, Plague Angel to like Rom or Wormwood, because it's like Plague Angels where they're just like rediscovering their creativity and they're kind of trying some new things with the new kind of vocal patterns that you heard.
It's a pretty new lineup, I think, and you can really hear that. I think a lot of outside of Morgan, how everybody has a say and a stake in what the band sounds like now.
Yeah, and it starts to gel a lot more, especially in this next set that we're going to hear, which is Rom 5:12, which stands for Romans 5:12, a Bible passage, and it's got one of the booklets from hell, and we should kind of talk about the new kind of
the 30 to 40 page booklets.
Yeah, but just the art direction. I mean, as an artist, I mean, what kind of things are you seeing the direction that Marduk's heading from these sort of crappy cliche, evil covers to this?
Well, I mean, Chris interviewed. God, I'm trying to think what the hell is this for. Well, he was interviewing Marduk for a story or something for a music gig. And he was talking with Mortis, and he was showing him the layouts for Wormwood before it was actually put out, and just how they're taking this really old kind of like visual thing. I mean, with all the Bible
looks like
stuff.
It's a lot of Black Plague kind of.
But then they're interjecting like a different head on it, so this like woman looks like she's getting ready to was it insanguate or basically suck the blood out of somebody.
Yeah,
but like taking these like old historic looking photos and like amping them up with some kind of like mythical thing to make them look this real world evil that we've never seen before kind of thing. It's really really nice looking stuff. And it's look at the Funeral Mist kind of covers. You just glance at the cover and like, oh, that's interesting.
And then you look closely, like,
it's Jesus Christ, that's disturbing. Awful.
Yeah, highly disturbing stuff.
But it's got a really, really concise, like, unique looking vision that, I mean, when you see the covers, you're usually like, okay, that's a Marduk cover. Mm-hmm. And they seem to have enough play with, I mean, you look at the last three covers put together, and you can finally start to see, like, a cohesiveness to their design.
Yeah. And I was telling him, like, with Plague Angel layout, on the one of the first pages there is a church that I visited last summer, St. Vitus Cathedral in Prague, which obviously goes along with Hangman of Prague. I was trying to rack my brain. I've heard that term Hangman of Prague before. I don't know if it was a famous. I'll have to investigate just for my own historical purposes. But I feel like when we were touring Prague, there was a story that one of the tour guys was talking about hanging a lot of criminals or anti-Christians or somebody from in front of the St. Vitus Cathedral, which, by the way, it's a pretty badass name for a cathedral, St. Vitus. And this thing looks oppressive. I mean, if you get a chance, man, it's probably one of the most like metal churches you'll ever see. But
not the band.
Yeah. But so. Again, I've been drawn to that from a visual element. I can only imagine you as a professional artist, who. Well,
even from a topography standpoint, like in the newer records, like it makes you turn the booklet like around in your hands as you're reading it, which is a pretty kind of.
And I think nowadays in the digital era, where so much is sort of disconnected from owning the albums and looking at the artwork and stuff. I mean, I think it's a brave decision for Marduk to invest as much time into this stuff, and I hope it pays off, and I hope people are buying their stuff. Well, when you
pick up a Marduk CD compared to any other CD, I mean, there's a weight difference.
Oh, for sure. I can't even get my ROM booklet back in without tearing it because there's not enough room in the plastic to like slide it through without it kind of getting caught.
Yeah,
it's pissing me off. So Marduk, you need to work on that. Yeah, Regain Records needs to work on that. But this record, like we said, is where I think a lot of things start to gel for them. You've got Devo now has done his second record. The bass is really starting to come out, especially. You're going to hear it a lot on like the Leveling Dust and Through the Belly of Damnation, the first two cuts we're going to play here in a second, and just some really clean playing, which is unique to black metal, which is always about distorted bass, in a way, or non-bass, if you want to get to the early years of black metal where the bass is almost non-existent.
It's just there to like fill up that sonic vacuum of that little tiny frequency they needed to fill there.
Sure.
But I mean, the production on these last couple of records almost reminds me of like 70s rock or something.
Yeah, that warm analog kind of feel, or even like old King Crimson or November records, or some of that old like kind of great kind of proggy rock kind of stuff. And it
actually has almost the feel of like putting a record on, like that extra little like hiss, or it just feels like a little bit more real than all this super overproduced stuff that we've had in years past.
Now, in terms of vocals, the vocal variations are so unique, and I think like you hear especially on like the Leveling Dust, which is the opening cut of Rom, just the things he's doing. He's taking a lot more chances than he did on Plague Angel. I think he's very conservative, because I don't think he wants to maybe upset the Marduk fans too much by like doing so many weird things with vocals. But here I feel like he's starting to really come out of his shell, and the whole band.
It doesn't come across as like over flamboyant either. It's whatever's needed for the song. Okay, maybe I have to do some kind of weird creaking thing with my voice.
He does like a lot of Attila kind of stuff, which
just like really weird. Because when we first heard, De Mysterious, I was like, I don't know what the deal is with these vocals. Do I like them? Do I not like them? And then I figured out I liked them, but it kind of like messed with your preconceptions of the music, and I think it absolutely actually made it more eerie.
Yeah, and I think you bring up De Mysterious. Hellhammer was such like a just pummeling drummer, and the music, especially in like Leveling Dust and Through the Belly of Damnation, it's very straight ahead and pummeling it. Yeah, for the most part. And yet you said he's like opposing the music, because his vocal lines, he's like what Billie Holiday used to do with jazz, where she wouldn't work within the time signatures of what the band behind her was doing, and that's what made her stand out so much, because she was singing across and over top time signatures. Like if the band would stop playing like on like a 4/4 scale or something like that, she would be doing like 16/4, or whatever. And like, so she would still be like shrieking over top the end of it, and that's what I think Mortis is doing. Mortis is doing over top of all this sort of stuff. He's just lingering with certain notes and putting his voice into like uncomfortable pockets of the music, and
he's acting. I mean, as cliche as it sounds, acting as another instrument within the band. But really, and how many other vocalists can we think of in extreme metal? I mean, okay, what's the most extreme thing we do? Okay, let's scream real loud. But what about being, sound like you're being tortured?
Yeah.
Okay, that, you got Attila and you've got Mortis, and I'm sure there's probably a handful of others that mess around with that kind of
Abruptum,
stuff. But, yeah, where the voice is not even necessarily, meant for, you're not even supposed to understand the lyrics at all. It's just this eerie, mood setting kind of thing.
I guess maybe it's the equivalent for Marduk of what keyboards, when done right, can add in terms of atmosphere. Like the vocals in a sense are creating like an organic atmosphere that sort of engulfs the music at times.
As is, their institution of a lot of samples. I mean, a lot of these old, like I think it's on the Funeral Mist record. I forget the hell the name of the song, but it's like 12 minutes long.
Yeah.
Where it's just this sermon going over the top.
Yeah.
And the music, I absolutely love that song.
Well, and I guess we should briefly mention the fact that this is now fitting into what this whole new black metal scene called Orthodox black metal, which is different for Marduk than what we've heard before. I mean,
but you can throw in like Deathspell Omega and a lot of these other guys.
Yeah, what's the basic premise behind that? I guess
it's a journalistic tag.
They're just kind of taking like church sermons and
I think it's scriptures. It's almost like going back to what black metal was about, in the beginning, the grimness, all this kind of stuff. But it's almost all completely based off, Christian. Yeah. The Christian doctrine.
And I really just get this feel of medievalness to it, the dark ages, the sort of. And it's weird, and I it's hard to really explain, but I guess having gone to Prague last summer, and outside of Prague is a village. which just suddenly escapes me right now. We took a train to this village, and if you're familiar with the Diabolical Masquerade Nightwork cover, which features the sort of chandelier made out of skulls and skeletons and things like that, it's this ossuary that's basically full of like, I think there's 50,000 dead bodies inside of it, but it's like all decorated with skulls and bones, and they make like a crucifix out of like bones and skulls. I mean, it is like the most metal thing you've ever seen. And I feel like and that was done because they ran out of places to bury bodies because of the plague and stuff. So they just started, these kind of crazy wacky priests started making like it into decorations inside this holy thing.
DIY.
Yet it's like so like evil, inside there. Yeah, a little do it yourself kind of stuff. But having been there, like when I listen to like Marduk or Funeral Mist or Deathspell Omega, like that music is what's like playing is like the soundtrack as I enter a place like that, which is like this sort of backwards medieval, Orthodox Eastern European weirdness, and I don't know, it's got a neat quality to it. But let's get back to some music. We got the Leveling Dust and Through the Belly of Damnation, and what you'll hear here is this really sort of cool, clean bass picking that you picked up on. It's very finger picking almost.
It sounds like Steve Harris from Iron Maiden kind of. Yeah, but it's almost a little more clangy.
Almost hear the pulls that he's doing. The finger pulls,
I think he's definitely not using a pick at all. It just feels really, really natural.
And it's got one of the sweetest breakdowns I've ever heard Marduk do. Just this total Middle Eastern sort of groove. And then we're going to come out with probably Mark and I, one of our favorite newer Marduk songs called Accuser, Opposer, which starts like a kind of a scene out of The Godfather, the little Latin Catholic ceremony, and has a guest appearance, and we'll tell you about that guest appearance when we come back, so enjoy that.
Emundissime spiritus, omnes incursio adversari, omne phantasma, omnis legio, in nomine Domini nostri, eradicare et defugare ab hoc ipse tibi imperat, qui tede supernis celorum in inferiora,
That was Accuser, Opposer, Through the Belly of Damnation, and The Leveling Dust. All three can be found on the Rom 512 record. And tell us about our guest vocalist that you heard there on that tune, Mr. Mark.
He has a name that I cannot pronounce normally. So it's like
some like Gaelic name.
Alan Azrael.
Yeah.
I'll say from Primordial.
Yeah.
Which is, his voice is pretty unmistakable. He's probably one of the best, like...
He's one of my favorite clean but not clean vocalists.
I mean, he can do really, really harsh death vocals, or like just really great. Like, I don't even know how to really describe it. I mean, outside of like, there's a ton of power behind him.
He's got a soaring quality to him. You know, it's pretty epic. It's as epic.
I mean, I guess it's kind of like romanticized, medieval-ish to some degree as well, but not like, you know, some dude in a lute kind of thing.
Yeah. It's like a dark pagan kind of Bruce Dickinson kind of quality or something. You know, like
it's hard
he
to...
evokes that kind of like the solo stuff
Chemical
that Dickinson did. It kind of like that, like in terms
but
of just
not
that.
the vibrato and stuff. But he's similar to Vincent Cavanaugh to some degree as well.
Yeah, that's a good place to
from
go.
Anathema,
Which is interesting because, you know, it's funny, like as we were kind of listening to some of the later stuff, I hear these like elements of like British doom almost inside of some of the like choices that Marduk's making with some of the stuff. And I don't mean it in like a really distinct like, oh, that's obviously Paradise Lost, that's
just
obviously
like an atmosphere kind of way.
But like especially the old like what was the Anathema EP that they did before Silent Enigma after Serenades?
Pentecost 3.
Yeah, like how that has this like engulfing feel.
It's a really
to
weird, long, just like kind of experimental.
Yeah,
song,
almost like uncomfortable in some sort of ways. And so I hear some of those kind of elements, I guess. You know, Beyond Dawn, you know, also does like unsettling kind of things like what Marduk's been doing. But you actually found a pretty interesting definition of orthodox black metal, right? Then that it's
basically taking, instead of just being like, you know, screw Jesus and, you know, rape Mary and all this really like blatant stuff that anybody that's
sort of like childish and like really
but actually getting to the root of like even like metaphysical kind of things about this, but also like getting to the root of exactly like what it's all about, like deep down, like going through verse. And
sure,
I mean both Mortis and Morgan from Marduk talk about how they go through, you know, the Old Testament and how it's that brutality of the Bible that's so appealing, and also by spotlighting that, it shows the hypocrisy of, you know, religion and all that kind of stuff as well.
So they're kind of looking almost at the historical nature of it, going to the very roots of it.
Yeah, go to the source, you know, as much as
which obviously Marduk showed a certain knack and talent for back with like, you know, like an album like Nightwing where they go into more the historical nature of like Dracula, but like they were still just only dealing with Dracula at that point. They weren't going like any deeper.
Dracula,
you know?
As opposed to what the kind of subject matter they have now, it seems a little bit more like it's more mature and thought out now than just like Dracula's like, okay, Dracula,
Elizabeth Bathory, that kind of stuff's like, you know, old hat kind of. So, but now, you know, they go from a tune like that, and especially at the end of that song, you start to hear the use of sort of church samples and like this aura and atmospheric kind of thing, you know, that they tack on to a lot of their songs, or they even mix in. And you'll hear a little bit more of that on Wormwood, which is where we're going next. And Wormwood, of course, is 2009, and this is one of our favorite records of the year for sure. We should mention that in the upcoming episodes, we'll be doing our top records of 2009 here pretty soon. So
20 of them.
20 essential items.
Yes.
In no particular order. At least we don't think so.
Well, the order keeps changing, so
yeah. It's,
1 week it's this, the next week it's that.
And Marduk is definitely at the top of our list, and I'm glad to actually see some acknowledgement of a band like Marduk, who's kind of going through a rebirthing process, get the sort of acknowledgement like in Decibel and places like that. They actually,
it's actually been really like critically hailed pretty well. Yeah, we'll see how it sells.
Yeah, I'm not for sure, but again, going back to, you know, great layout, just like we talked about with Rom and with Plague Angel and stuff. I mean, the cover is just, I mean, it says it all.
It's like a mummified priest.
Yeah, it's or something, you know. And there's a lot of like Old West kind of weird, like almost like Great Depression kind of photos that are mixed in with some of the satanic kind of
Well, the stuff you throw, like, you just, by flipping through, you don't necessarily, nothing looks too off kilter, but then you look a little bit closely and stuff's just like, oh, God.
Yeah, it's very warped.
Just weird juxtaposition of images.
And again, everybody's starting to come into their own even more. It's the comfort level that Mortis has as a vocalist. He's now going very over the top in a lot of ways, and then to our liking,
Well, and some of the stuff we're going to hear where he's just like squealing in the background.
Yeah,
like, literally.
gurgling. Yeah, just really weird kind of stuff. And when we talk about a tune like Funeral Dawn, they actually mix the riff in with his sort of like gurgle scream. It almost becomes part of the guitar riff, the wall of sound. We've got a drummer, Lars, who I kind of like the fact that he's a little bit more laid back. He's reserved in a sense. He doesn't have that.
When he blasts, it means something.
Yeah, that's what I mean. And there's more of that sort of like variety there, and he's making a lot more choices, whereas like in the past, the drummers from Marduk just sort of went
pretty much straight ahead.
Yeah, and that's like even like a guy like Frost has learned really well to do that, whereas like in early Satyricon, Frost kind of had one speed, but then by the time of like Rebel Extravaganza and stuff, he's starting to like vary his approach.
You go from blast to just double bass to like mess around with the cymbals and just like why it doesn't all have to be just so fast.
And I'm not saying that Lars is not as good of a drummer or as technically competent as what Frost or Hellhammer, these guys do, but in terms of like he's got a lot more reserved nature to him, and he sort of tastefully uses the speed rather than just shoves it. It
seems more intuitive than razor sharp precision, which I think works better with what the kind of aesthetic Marduk's established for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And other things that jump out to you as being like different from say like Plague Angel or Rom on this record for you, or?
Outside of just everything kind of coming together, Mortis's vocals, the arrangements and the dualities between bass and guitar, how they're not always like complementing one another. They're like going in opposition and even like contradicting one another at times.
Yeah, and we'll hear that in the tune we're going to close this next set with, called As a Garment, which is the album closer of Wormwood, and it's a mournful, kind of bizarre. I don't even know where it fits. Like it sounds like it should be on someone else's record, but yet it fits on the themes of Wormwood.
Yeah, like hearing all these songs separately, it sounds bizarre, but when you put them all in a row, it all works really well.
Yeah,
it's bizarre, but
yeah. And it could fit again. Maybe that it's a tune like As a Garment that was giving me the vibe of like some of the older, kind of more sparse, depressing Anathema sort of stuff. Almost like Alternative 4 or Silent Enigma, where it's just like
you broke the
bottom of disparity.
This one simple riff that can show me despair. There you go. You got it.
And so
mourning or something.
Yeah, and that's a new emotion for Marduk, is mournfulness. That's never been there before, and so that's kind of cool. And you'll hear that coming up. But the trio of tunes that we picked for this next set, we got Nowhere, No One, Nothing, which is again a
bleak song.
What's that?
Bleak song.
Yeah, very bleak. and again, it starts in typical sort of Marduk album opener fashion, kind of a barn burner, if you will.
Yeah.
But then it sort of knows how to slow down at a certain point in the song, and I think that's the difference between like albums like Wormwood and some of the stuff of the past, is that Marduk's making more like distinct choices in terms of adding a variety of music, but it's not forced evolution. It's like a naturally evolving band at this point. It doesn't feel like like World Funeral, for instance, felt like you hear that, or La Grande Danse Macabre, and those are like obvious attempts at trying to change the game, but you said they didn't have any fresh ideas to change the game.
Yeah, and they stand out as being awkward.
Yeah,
like stuff goes on for too long.
And whereas this, like, even if they like lay like a sample of like a sermon for 1.5 minutes at the end of a song, like Accuser, Opposer, which we probably fade out a little bit, but it's all meant to be there. It's not meant to like drag on or be boring or repetitive. It's there to sort of create an aesthetic.
I think it's all big picture orchestration now.
Yeah.
It's not just like, okay, let's create a 3.5 minute song that's blasphemous and fast.
Yeah. So it's pretty cool. And Nowhere, No One, Nothing kind of has that. And we were noticing that the bass and just the cleanliness of the bass and how apparent it is on this record, it reminded me like punk grind bass almost. Like it's just there sort of like popping along with the song, and then adding like a different layer that's never been there for Marduk. And then Funeral Dawn, probably the I wrote down as a note, probably the coolest use of the Swedish black metal riff that I've ever heard. I mean, it's taking this sort of cliche black metal riff and then mixing it with this sort of scream to like add a kind of terrible dimension to it. It's pretty awesome. You hear a lot of the gurgling, kind of grinding vocals that Mark was kind of talking about. And this has like a march quality to it, and I think that's the interesting thing about this.
Funerary march.
Yeah. And also very apocalyptic in a sense. And I mentioned Godflesh, even though there isn't really an industrial nature to the music, it has that sort of end of the world.
I think it has an industrial vibe, but it's all played through
organics. Yeah, no machines, no keyboards, no samples, things like that. Other than the like church samples and stuff. And then we're gonna end the set with one of your favorites, chorus of cracking necks. What's going on there?
That actually has some cracking necks in it.
It does.
I mean, it's almost that weird. I forget which movie it must have been one of those J-horror, Japanese horror.
Oh, okay.
Films where like the kids are doing really like like The Ring or like
Battle Royale. Wow, that's not really. Oh, like Ringu or the Audition.
Audition
kind of stuff?
Or just that era stuff, but where they have these really bizarre like just really bizarre noises for when people are moving
Speaking
around.
of bizarre noises,
I know.
Demons in our
We're gonna get a course of
demons are
cat
haunting
next
us.
here.
Yeah, we're gonna mix that with a black metal riff and call it a Marduk. And then the coolest thing is about the halfway point, it grinds into a Bathory Dark Throne riff. This sort of simple, but just
it's like brilliant. Heavy metal riff 101.
Yeah,
really sweet.
Motorhead, Dark Throne, that kind of stuff. So, and then we're gonna end. Oh wait, I'm sorry, we're not doing chorus of cracking necks.
That's what we're ending with.
Yeah,
actually.
that's what we're ending with. Well, so we don't have to talk about that song now. We're gonna end with As a Garment, which is the tune we were talking about before, with the bass and the guitar kind of trading off and stuff. So, which again I noticed, and you guys out there can tell me if I'm completely wrong, but Mark kind of conceded that there is this old Nick Cave Swans kind of vibe to it. I don't know. It's got an epic, kind of weird, early 80s, like, industrial indie feel to it or something. Anyways, enjoy Nowhere, No One, Nothing, Funeral Dawn, and As a Garment.
Fulfillment in death, left in circles,
Please heard As a Garment, Funeral Dawn, Nowhere, No One, Nothing.
And we're going to close things out tonight with Chorus of Cracking Necks, which we talked about before. So let us know what you thought. Let us know what era of Marduk's your favorite. Maybe this is the new era is new to you, and you're kind of entering into it for the first time. Shoot us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com, or check out the website. You can leave us some info there, requiempodcast.com. Leave us a thing on iTunes.
A rating on iTunes would be fantastic.
Yeah.
If you'd like to help us with our costs, you can also donate right on the site, or you can help us out by buying some great Requiem Podcast merchandise.
Yeah, we got mugs, t-shirts, you name it. And Mark's also got some art prints for sale from the illustrations that he does for Decibel. You can buy a nice little Christmas card, postcard
There you go.
set
Yeah, 10
for the
pack
holidays.
of illustrations.
Yeah, but we hope you enjoyed our two-parter on Marduk. Tune in soon for our year-end Top 20, Part 1. And for Requiem Metal Podcast, I'm Jason.
And I'm Mark.
Here's Chorus of Cracking Necks.